once again to discuss things.
Anyway, hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Geeky Gentlemen Live. Except we're not broadcasting live.
We should be broadcasting live.
No, because then everyone would just be like, oh my god, you guys, and I'm like, eh.
That's fair.
Yeah.
We should have done a live show while I was here. That would have been fun, actually.
I mean, there's little time left, maybe, but I don't know. I don't know.
We did on my account, would be alright.
Yeah, okay. Anyway, hi everyone. Yeah, so Geeky Gentlemen Live in person. Geeky Gentlemen in person, that's a better way to put it.
Yes.
So Steve is here, and we're still in History Month stuff, so Steve has picked a topic for us this time. What is the general gist of this topic?
General framework here is our favorite or objectively the best decades for media and entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
Initially, we were going to just do the 70s, and then we found out most of our favorite stuff was a little bit before and a little bit after.
Yeah.
So now we're just like, the best in general. Clearly, the objective answer is 1800.
1800, best century.
Yep.
See, I'm a big fan of the BCs, you know?
It's fair.
You get, like, the pyramids and stuff.
You don't get that stone chisel work anymore.
I know. No, so this is mainly in the 1900s. Not even really the 1900s. It's like, I don't think I'm going to put anything pre-40s on here.
Nothing pre-60s for me, actually.
Yeah?
I mean, there's some stuff in the 30s and 40s, but, like, I don't clamor for it. It's more like a history lesson at this point.
Yeah, you're not even like... I thought you were a big Frank Sinatra guy.
I am, but most of his best music is 50s and later.
Oh, okay.
So,
okay. Yeah, alright,
yeah.
That's interesting.
I mean, old gangster movies. I like noirs and stuff from the 30s and 40s, but, like, I'm not going to make that my decade for one set of films.
Yeah, and I like some of the, Universal movies from the 30s and stuff, but...
It's one genre. You're not going to judge an entire decade by one genre.
Exactly. That, and I mean, the racism was so much more explicit pre-40s.
Yeah.
So why is it that we initially gravitated toward the 70s?
70s, I think, for me, at least for a few years now, has always been my favorite era for movies. I think, for the most part, the 70s has got some of the most critically acclaimed, memorable, most important movies to reference, because we're in this annoying period of time where all we're doing is referencing the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at any of these people that talk about films that they're making now, all of them talk about their favorite movies, and they're always from the 70s.
Okay.
Like Godfather is in the 70s, Taxi Driver is 70s, 3 Days of the Condor is 70s, Superman 78, Chinatown.
I know someone posted a side-by-side comparison of the title for The Shining and Get Out.
Yeah.
And they, went so close as to, sample the teal used for the text.
Ooh.
And see just how close a shade match they got for that.
That's cool.
Yeah, so, just shit like that. Yeah, there's a lot of reverence for the 70s. And yeah, 70s film is huge. I don't know what changed in the 70s that made
Most
film.
people's favorite films of all time, 9 times out of 10, it's probably from the 70s. Because, Chinatown's a big one, but The Shining, like you said, is the other one. Both Godfather movies.
Mm-hmm. Star Wars.
It may not be the best... It may not have my favorite film, per se, at the top, but it's really hard to make a best films of all time without having, half the list be 70s.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And, so it's weird, because neither of us were, of course, born in the 70s.
Nope. Not even close.
Yeah, not even close. But for some reason, a lot of our favorite stuff's from the 70s, because when we initially said 70s, I was like, oh, I know so many albums from the 70s. Turns out I don't. I know some of my favorite albums are from the 70s. Dark Side of the Moon, still my favorite album of all time, is, of course, 70s.
Yeah.
But a lot of what I like is late 60s. And, I don't know if you watch any of Todd in the Shadows reviews or stuff. No?
No.
He'll make this consistent, joke, but it's not really a joke, it's just a really good point, where it's like, oh yeah, well this guy survived into 1990, but 1990 wasn't really the 90s, it was just the leftovers of the 80s. And I'm like, that's not wrong.
It really isn't. It's not the 90s until like 95.
Yeah, or like 92 with like Nirvana and shit.
True.
So it's just like so stuff like that I tend to think of. So like the 60s, when people talk about the 60s, they're talking mid-60s, because early 60s is very different from mid-60s, what you think of for mid-60s, and late 60s is almost just like the 70s.
Well, and the 70s is that decade where it's not one half of it's better remembered than the rest of it. Like, the best 70s stuff is not the tail end of the 70s. It's all throughout.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Jaws, Superman, and Halloween were the same year. Godfather's, 71?
Mm-hmm.
3 Days of the Condor, 77. Like, every year of the 70s is consistently packed with stuff.
Yeah, but, like, the really weird thing for me is, as much as I like a lot of stuff from the 70s, I like, besides Dark Side of the Moon and a lot of other Pink Floyd albums, I like things from other decades significantly more than I like many one things from the 70s.
That's fair. 70s is probably the greatest concentration of amazing things, but it's probably not my favorite overall of any one thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, my favorite comics are from the 80s. Favorite music is from the 2000s. Favorite movies is probably dice up between now and the 70s.
Yeah, like, for me, the last 2 decades or so have been just really, really good for film and comics. I know you don't like a lot of the early 2000s comics and stuff.
Not for DC. Early 2000s Marvel was killing it. Between Jessica Jones, Ultimate Spider-Man, and Daredevil alone on Bendis' side is incredible.
Okay. See, for me, I really like part of it's because that's the stuff I was reading, because that's what the library had when I started getting into comics, even though I was, late 2000s. But just, I don't know, the Batman arcs, to go from, No Man's Land into War Games into Under the Hood into Grant Morrison.
That's fair.
It's built, or, taken down, built up.
Yeah.
And then to go from Morrison to 5 years where they just didn't publish Batman comics for some weird reason to Tom King.
Yeah, last decade is Morrison, this decade is Tom King. It's pretty consistently the two best runs of Batman ever.
Yeah.
At this point.
Yeah, and so, there's a lot of stuff just going on now that I think is really, really good, because things have gotten so much more meta, it seems, in the last 2 decades or so for media. Just across the board, film's much more meta and self-aware than I feel it used to be. Well,
everything except, and I think maybe this is the biggest caveat to throw into this, the only thing that doesn't have an equal say in this conversation is video games. Because video games is late 80s, early 90s into now, and that's all you got.
Mm-hmm.
So you really don't have a choice in video games the way you do with anything else.
Yeah. But just, I don't know, so much of media, like film, comics, even music, has gotten really introspective compared to what it used to be. I feel like most of the good films we talk about from the 70s are just trying to tell a story. They're not really thinking about themselves as films that much.
No, it's not as self-aware, for sure.
Yeah, but nowadays, the films that we talk about as really, really great films are not only analyzing their place in filmmaking, but in their place as art, period.
Well, and I think part of it's because, and we talked about this last video, but it's internet culture.
Mm-hmm.
Part of it is that now that everything is constantly made aware to you, you can't help but try and be a little bit meta.
Mm-hmm.
With the 70s in particular, so much shit was happening politically, and that everything sort of became, tell a very contained and tight story, and make a really, really good movie and understand everything you're doing on a technical level. For a very particular purpose, but don't question it too much, because this is the only vehicle you have to do anything right now.
Yeah.
3 Days of the Condor is a really good example of, if that was a meta movie, it would not have worked, because the point of that movie was to talk about the oil embargo.
Mm-hmm.
So we have that kind of stuff now, but because there is a constant state of nostalgia because of the internet, you kind of want to start breaking down forms.
Yeah, I think that changes things a lot, but then there's more awareness of media, because there's so much more of it now than there ever has been.
When you mentioned neither of us grew up in the 70s, but our favorite things are usually from the 70s and 80s, it's because we have access to all of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it used to be like, oh, Disney will rebroadcast its... or not rebroadcast, re-release its films.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, owning a film used to kind of be a big deal. Like, to talk about a great movie from the 70s, The Omen...
Yeah.
Or it's The Omen 1 and 2 are both from the 70s. But
was 2 in the 70s? I thought that was 80s.
I'm pretty sure it's still 70s.
Huh. I don't remember.
I feel like Omen 1's 76 and Omen 2's 79, but I might just be guessing there.
I don't remember.
But anyway, like in that, they watch a movie and they're watching it through a projector. Like one of the family members has to go and be the projectionist.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, that's just how if you were watching home movies, that's how you do it. You didn't have like even Betamax until mid-80s-ish.
Well, I mean, back in the day, theaters would, or not theaters, but studios would be more likely to re-release movies every couple of years because that's the only way people are going to keep watching them.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you weren't churning out 50, 60 movies a year like most studios do now.
Mm-hmm.
You had like 4 or 5 that you kept cycling back and forth through.
Yeah, and like, so Indiana Jones got that release a bunch and stuff. And so it's just...
Star Wars, too.
Mm-hmm. And so it changes the dynamic, and now there's so much more of it, so things are delving more into it, and that's changing the relationship that people have to it, which is interesting. So you'll get stuff like in comics, multiversity, which is the most meta piece of art I think has ever existed.
Yeah, you can read that entire book by reading the first page when it tells you to stop reading, and it's a complete story.
Yeah.
That's all you need.
Yeah. It's ridiculous. But that is the most meta piece of fiction, I think, ever. It's like you have things that are very fourth wall breaky, but that's like literally commenting on the process of reading, moving the events forward, and how much that changes the dynamic to it. So like, and I'm of the opinion that you couldn't give that to someone from even as recently as the 70s.
No.
I don't think they could comprehend it or be ready for it.
You need all the history, right? You need all the continuity building up of this is how we got better at using the art form, and this is how we started questioning the art form, and now this is how we start deconstructing it.
Mm-hmm.
Grant Morrison only makes sense in a context where people like Jim Steranko and Jack Kirby have already been around.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, so it's just really weird. Like, you kind of have this, like, story in your head of like, oh, if I could just take all the greatest songs from the past, 70 years or whatever, and go back in time, I could release all the world's greatest hits in like 2 years. It's like, no, they wouldn't be ready to listen to it.
Yeah.
You'd have Marty.
Back to the Future.
Yeah, you have Marty McFly. It's like, oh,
your kids are gonna love it.
Yeah.
And he's not wrong.
Mm-hmm. So I don't know. It's interesting to look at the way that that media changes. So kind of the conversation. What's the best decade for media? It's like, well, it's so different because even though I like a lot of films from the 70s and stuff, I have to put myself in a place for most of them.
They're long and boring movies.
Uh-huh.
I love The Godfather, but God, I need to be in a mood for that.
Yeah, and like I love The Shining, but it is a slow burn.
You need a mood.
Yeah, and then there's like the things that you don't have to do that for are the exceptions that have moved film forward, for example, like Star Wars.
Yeah.
You don't need to put yourself in a mood for Star Wars as far as like preparing yourself to watch something that's slower paced. That movie has modern pacing, which is weird.
Well, it's part of the reason modern pacing is modern pacing. Mm-hmm. So, although to be fair, I think Disney has spoiled me because I think New Hope is really boring now.
Oh, yeah?
Because I have Last Jedi. And I have Rogue One. I don't really need New Hope anymore. New Hope is fine, but it's not Last Jedi.
Yeah. There come the hate comments.
I know. I see them all right away.
Yeah, but like, okay, so Last Jedi is another example of that, where it's great, but obviously besides just the fact that you need Luke's arc from the original story to tell, like, the way that it's commenting on the tropes of the Star Wars style of storytelling, you can't have it without going through 6 Star Wars films previous, plus soft reboot.
Well, and not just the movies, but the culture around the movies. You need the culture that hated the prequels that started developing apologism for the prequels to make The Last Jedi as impactful as it is. Because it's that right in between spot of, here's everything about the prequels we thought was going to work and didn't, and here's everything about the original trilogy that we don't question because it didn't work. And you just mash it together into one movie that questions the whole legacy.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah.
It's a perfect movie.
Ooh.
It's a perfect movie.
Oh my. So that creates an interesting discussion then about whether or not there can be a best decade for media, or if it just happened that the 70s were just a big step forward across the board, but otherwise have kind of had their impact.
70s, I think part of the reason it might also be this case is that mass communication starts making a whole lot more sense 70s and onward. So 70s is in conversation with everything up to the present and everything before it in a way every other decade isn't. So like the 60s has no tie back to the 50s at all, really. But the 70s and the 60s bleed into each other very early on. And then a lot of the franchises that are developed towards the end of the 70s bleed into the 80s. Like Steven Spielberg is Steven Spielberg in the 80s, but he gets his roots in the 70s because of Jaws. You know? Like 70s is that perfect transition period where everything's not only being mass-produced now, but franchises are starting to develop, cross-pollination's happening. You don't think of 70s Superman as a 70s Superman movie, per se. You don't think of Halloween as a 70s movie, per se. But they are.
And it's weird because, like, Halloween comes out and then you've got a long stretch before Halloween 2, right?
No, you have 78 to 80.
Okay.
But Halloween 2 is set the same day as Halloween 1, so it's set in 1978. And then Halloween 3 happens almost instantaneously. Then Halloween 3 happens a little bit later.
What do you mean Halloween 4?
Halloween 4. Halloween 4... No, wait. Halloween 2 happens like a couple years later. Halloween 3 happens a couple years after. Then Halloween 4 and 5 is more like a 5-year gap, I think.
Okay.
The biggest gap we've had is between the Rob Zombie remake and the new one, which is like almost 10 years.
Okay, well, I just bring it up because, like, Michael Myers had trouble kind of being iconic in the slasher genre until because there was such a large gap at a certain point between his film franchises, even though he's one of the first in the slasher
Well,
genre.
I think that's the issue, right? Michael Myers is the first slasher, but then the 80s happens and we have Freddy and Jason, and they're consistently popping out movies, and then Michael's just sporadically through them.
Okay. Yeah, that might make sense.
Michael Myers doesn't have like a slasher movie like a Halloween 4 or 5 until Freddy and Jason are established. So does that have that? Maybe that's what that is then.
Yeah.
And Child's Play is 80s, isn't it?
Late
Okay.
80s is when Child's Play starts up and then goes through the 90s. And
Yeah, those are even more sporadic.
yeah, and those, like, there are just so many Child's Play movies, too. It's kind of
Are there?
ridiculous. There's Bride of Chucky, Seed of Chucky, Cult of Chucky.
Oh, yeah.
You start getting into some really weird shit with that. They just keep, like, running out of ideas and start doing the next crazy thing they could think of.
Well, there's a reboot happening.
Oh, yeah.
It's filming right now.
Yeah. So, like, it's just interesting to think about the way that these things have an impact, and, you know, that idea of standing on the shoulders of giants that come before you.
Comics, again, are a really good example of this, too, where a lot of the most influential runs don't necessarily happen in the 70s, but they need the 70s to exist. For example, New Teen Titans happens in the 80s, but it only happens in the 80s because at the tail end of the 70s is when Batman has Dick Grayson move out and go to college. So it owes a lot to what happens there, and that status quo sticks for a long time. Bruce moving into the city and getting a penthouse there for most of the 70s. And then the return to the Batcave happening in the 80s makes a whole lot more sense. What's another good example of this? Demon in a Bottle is the 70s, but Tony Stark, alcoholism, Denny O'Neil is the 80s.
Okay.
Like that kind of thing. Daredevil becomes Daredevil in the 80s with Frank Miller, but Frank Miller gets to start doing stuff in the late 70s into the 80s.
Okay. Yeah, and, like, 80s are a weird decade for comics because, like, that's the big push. That's like British invasion almost, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, that's what they called it, right? That's Watchmen, that's Neil Gaiman's Sandman. Or is that 90s?
Sandman's 90s.
Sandman is 90s. Okay. Well, no, so we had Alan Moore, we had Grant Morrison show up.
Yeah, because Gothic's 80s.
Yes. Gothic is 80s, and so is Arkham Asylum.
Yeah, 88, right? Or no, 89.
89. It's the movie. Yeah. Jim Steranko's American.
Can I just real quick?
Yeah.
I have my copy of Killing Joke, and I'm pretty
yeah,
sure
please.
on the cover, or on the back cover, there's a quote from Tim Burton. It's like, this movie really inspired Batman 89. I'm like, no, it didn't.
Bullshit.
You're just saying that.
Bullshit. Bullshit that inspired your movie. What scene? Name one scene in that movie that has anything
Well, we
to do-
dropped him into acid.
There's a bat, and there's a Joker. Inspiration.
So yeah, shit like that. Burton's movies are interesting to talk about. Just how he's developed as an artist and
As
become.
in not.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know. He's become very niche. It's
Has he?
interesting to see. It's interesting to see when Burton does something that's not Burton style, like Big Fish.
That's fair.
Yeah, that's.
Well, Dumbo. Dumbo looks really interesting. Have you seen the trailers for that?
I didn't realize that was him doing.
He's
that.
making a live-action Dumbo movie. Colin Farrell's in it.
As Dumbo.
No.
Damn.
No. Why would he be Dumbo?
I don't know.
Why would that make any sense?
Why wouldn't it?
Why would it?
Why don't you want that now?
I mean, I'm not saying I don't want it now, but why would that be your instinct?
I don't know. It's a movie called Dumbo. Colin Farrell's a big actor. So.
But yeah, the trailers for Dumbo don't look like a Tim Burton movie.
Yeah,
Alice in Wonderland certainly was a bit of a departure, except for Johnny Depp.
There's an old College Humor video where it's like Tim Burton's deciding to make another movie, and he's got like his whole cast there. He's like, all right, someone get Johnny Depp and my wife on the phone, and Danny Elfman, work me up a score. And Danny Elfman's just sitting there on his phone. He's like, bum 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 bum.
I remember that one.
Yeah, it's exactly on point. It's like brilliant. I love it. That shit so on point.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's just like that's the other thing to think about though, is like with directors or artists, like comic writers and artists, to think about is the way that, it's not like they just worked through for one decade.
No.
You mentioned Spielberg earlier.
Yeah.
So you got Spielberg in the 70s, then Spielberg in the 80s. 90s Spielberg is really interesting, because that's when you start to get things like Jurassic Park, Saving Private Ryan, all those things. And then it starts to take a weird turn when Spielberg keeps making movies in the 2000s, because they don't work as well.
Well, Spielberg's a really bizarre case, because I feel like the whole like 80s cultural worship that we anchor on Spielberg doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Because we do homages to Jaws a lot, but that's 70s. We do a lot of like... Because Spielberg's got those weird sort of long takes where everything he does has this like 5-minute oneer at some point where it's right before like the big dramatic finale scene, and you're cycling through all the characters, and then it's almost like he's trying to give you a recap of the entire movie in 5 minutes before the status quo breaks. And that's a thing he did in the 90s. But that's a thing Stranger Things does for some reason. And that show is entirely 80s.
Well, it's because the 80s kids forgot, like, when they were growing up exactly.
Yeah.
They just associate a lot of that stuff with the 80s, even though it
Yeah.
wasn't the 90s.
A lot of Spielberg's, like, weird cliche techniques aren't even 80s things. It's bizarre to me.
Mm-hmm.
So...
Yeah. So it's interesting to see how, like, those people develop as artists. Like, Morrison starts in the 80s, and nowadays Morrison says stuff like, oh, making Batman dark was one of the worst things ever. Like, did you fucking read Arkham Asylum?
Did you read Gothic? Did you read the child murdering story?
He's got one of the darkest scenes with Batman I've ever seen, where, like, he makes Thomas Wayne the worst father ever. Like, no one talks about this one in Arkham Asylum, when Bruce is having the flashbacks to the alley, which was, to be fair, he was doing this before every other story did that. But
True.
Bruce is having the flashbacks to the alley, and Thomas is annoyed that he's crying for some reason at the movie, and he's like, Bruce, if you don't stop crying right now, I'm going to leave you right here. And then Joe Chill comes around the corner, and then it's like super fucking dark.
Mortifying.
Right?
Well, in Gothic ends with Bruce Wayne getting mailed a beating heart from the devil.
Jesus Christ. Yeah.
It's really doing dark here.
Yeah, and then, like, Animal Man has one of the most melancholy endings ever.
Oh, God. Well, I mean, Animal Man's also got that scene, the Coyote Gospel thing, where Wile E. Coyote comes into our dimension, crash lands on the road, and gets injured like he does in the cartoon, but is literally bleeding out and damaged and stitches himself back together.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Fucked up and scary.
Yeah, and so, like, but that like, speaks to the evolution of the artist through the ages, because now Grant Morrison's like, yeah, I was doing that because I was trying to get popular. Now I realize that getting popular kind of ruined part of what makes comics so good. And I'm like, yeah, that's really interesting. That's kind of wrapped up. I feel like Animal Man's almost the transition there, because after that is when he starts to do a lot more of, like, the super positive stories. So, like, Animal Man's the thing where he says, he has that line where he talks to him and he says, we thought that making you darker would make you more interesting. What does that say about us? And then, like, after that's when he starts doing, like, Justice League and stuff, and it's some of the most positive things. Like, I just read Justice League 1,000,000 for the first time, and that's where, like...
Oh, that's such a good story.
Yeah, and that's where, like, Earth Prime, Superman, whatever, like, is literally God and saves the universe at the end. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
So, like, that's when things start to get super positive for him, and then throughout the 2000s, he keeps getting it to be more and more positive, more and more lighthearted, trying to, like, and he's, of course, the only voice trying to turn the tide, almost.
Well, and I mean, you're right? Like, these artists are in conversation with each other, so, like, Grant Morrison's on this kick of trying to make comics more positive and redeem them from the darkness, and then Tom King has been talking about how his Batman stories is a 103-issue run to decide whether or not Bruce Wayne could ever be happy.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that, as dark and as traumatizing as that run is, its thesis is, can you be happy?
Mm-hmm.
So
that's really interesting. And then, like, to go to Moore, because Moore has the same criticism Morrison has of modern comics in a lot of ways, that they're too dark, they're trying too hard to market to adults when the medium survived off of kids. And
you gotta go full tilt with Alan Moore, though, because Alan Moore thinks it survived off of kids because kids refused to grow up and live in their parents' basements.
Mm-hmm.
Alan Moore was a dick about it.
Yeah. But, like, he's making an argument that, like, oh, they got too dark and so they're kind of ruined. And I'm like, but Alan Moore, you did that. You were part of that.
Frank Miller, too?
Yeah, Frank Miller, too, but Alan Moore in particular, because Frank Miller's happy with where they're at, I think.
No, I mean Frank Miller, too, as in Frank Miller also says we ruin comics by making them too dark.
Really?
Dark Knight Returns dudes say we made them too dark. Sin City says we made them too dark.
And, like, it's really interesting, but, like, Morrison's the only one who stuck with it and tried to make it positive. Are you going to, at least morbid curiosity, pick up Superman Year One?
No.
No, not even for a first issue, just to see it?
Why would I do that? Why would I want to read Frank Miller doing Superman at this point in our life?
I don't know, just because, like, if he's saying, oh, we've made it too dark and all this stuff, but, like, my point is Morrison's the only one from that generation that did have the real dark turn, that's actively still working and trying to turn the tide back a bit and succeeding, because, I mean, Rebirth is, it's not all Morrison, of course, but he's in the right wheelhouse with working there with Rebirth.
Rebirth feels like the rebooted universe you would have gotten after his Batman run, not New 52.
Mm-hmm.
New 52 is like darkness before the dawn for that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Morrison's another one of those people where he very clearly is aware of the history of comics creating problematic things, which is why he thinks continuity is so important. Mm-hmm. So he tries to make the problematic things make sense somehow. It could be as insignificant as Batmite being an annoying character that he turns into a fascinating psychological concept. Or it could be more along the lines of, like, let's take these shafted heroes that are just really bad mental health allegories and actually make them really interesting, like Doom Patrol.
Mm-hmm.
So Morrison's definitely more aware, and all of his stories seem to be some kind of metaphor about the state of the comics industry. His last issue on Batman is like the saddest thing ever, right?
Yeah,
where he's like, I tried to change this, and it's all going to go back to exactly where it was. And then it goes exactly back where it was.
And then, but that takes a toll, and so it's interesting, because, like, again, Morrison sticks with it to one degree or another.
Yeah.
Not as actively as he used to, but, I mean, he's come back for Green Lantern, he did Wonder Woman Earth 1.
I mean, he's an editor now, so it's hard for him to write.
Yeah. Whereas Moore just stopped and went to only create her own things, and his create her own things are incredibly dark still. And so I just don't get it with him.
Jeff Johns is another one of these people that does this that bothers me. Because Jeff Johns, he's the guy that writes Infinite Crisis and talks about how the problem with Watchmen is that it ruined comics and it made them too dark, so let's make Infinite Crisis and go full tilt into the deconstruction of the superhero that Watchmen started. And then he comes back and does Rebirth, and he's like, no, that was a terrible idea. Let's go the exact opposite direction.
And I mean, that's like, there's like 10 years between those stories, though, right?
Is there 10 years?
04 to 16, right? Oh, Infinite Crisis is 04, or is it 06?
Might be 06, I don't remember.
Yeah?
It's not that old. I don't know.
Hal Jordan's Green Lantern in it again, so it's got to be post 03.
Yeah. It's post Rebirth at least.
Yeah, so it's around those mid 2000s, and then you get Rebirth in 2016.
Right. I guess the point is just that Jeff Johns steps into the wheelhouse, makes the comics industry a very particular thing, and then blames the industry for being the way it is and tries to course correct it as if it wasn't his fault.
But at the same time, as I don't really care for DC Rebirth that one way or the other. I was like, fuck it, whatever. Pisses Alan Moore off, I'm cool with it.
Fair enough. Yeah.
And so I read the first issue of Doomsday Clock and had no interest. I might read the whole thing once it's complete just to see what he's trying to do with it.
I thought the first issue was overwritten as hell. I just couldn't keep up.
Yeah. But, like, is it fair to say that he changed his mind because of the evolution of the medium within the decades, right? Is that a fair assessment, or is it just a turn, tail, and run?
I think it's a turn, tail, and run. I think it's a very clearly he thought he was doing one thing, and it didn't quite work out, so he's just going to pretend like he didn't do it and go back the other way. And he does this all the time, right? This is the problem with Jeff Johns' writing, is Jeff Johns has a very clear idea of what he wants to do. It doesn't matter where the state of the comics industry is at the time, because he'll just do it anyway, and then try and supplant whatever was already working. So, like, the big problem with the Superman run is that he does New Krypton and all that stuff, and he does Secret Origin, and Secret Origin completely ignores everything that happened before with, like, the President Luthor, Joe Kelly, all that stuff, except it's a story that's set before then. So all that stuff has to be canon, and then he starts his run, but his run only makes sense if everything in between that he created a space for doesn't happen. Green Lantern's the exact same way. Where Green Lantern, it skips around in continuity after he starts getting momentum on it, and it only makes sense if you ignore everything that isn't written by him. And then his Batman, not his Batman, his Teen Titans. His Teen Titans is the same thing, where it's a good run, but only if you pretend like no other Teen Titans character ever existed ever. Even though they do simultaneously with his run.
Interesting.
Yeah, it really bothers me.
Okay. I don't know, like, I like Johns more than you, so I tend to just try to give him a little more credit and say, maybe he changed his mind, maybe he thought it one way and decided he was wrong.
I'm sure he changed his mind, but I also think he's one of the people that ruined Deathstroke in Teen Titans.
Okay. I don't know, just fair enough. But yeah, it's the idea of, like, the way the medium changes, so I can be of the opinion that comics are better now than they ever have been in history.
It's a really strong claim. I'm going to say they're better now than they've been in a long time. I don't know if they're the best they've been in history. Mr. I read Sandman every year.
Yeah, Sandman's really good. But now we're doing Sandman again.
Yeah.
And Gaiman's not doing it, but he's kind of giving people the blessing.
Yeah.
I don't know if you saw this says I do anything, but, like, did you see the cover for the first issue of Lucifer?
No.
It's Alan Moore on the cover.
Oh, hang on, I gotta look this up now.
It is legit 100% Alan Moore on the cover.
Who's writing Lucifer?
I don't even know the names.
Oh,
it's hilarious. Yeah.
It's just Lucifer #1?
Yeah. It's hilarious. It is 100% Alan Moore. And, like, I don't know anything about the Lucifer run originally, so...
The Mike Carey stuff?
Yeah, no, it completely goes over my fucking head.
Oh my god, it is!
It's so Alan Moore!
What the hell? We'll sin for food! It's amazing!
Right? So, like, I don't know what the commentary was there. I had no idea what was going on in Lucifer. But anyway, I think... better than they ever have been in history is probably, it's probably too far, but God, do I enjoy them so much more now than I do in anything else. Like, I like a lot of the stuff from the early 2000s, but at the same time, I recognize that there are significant problems with it. Comics now are much more not only self-aware, but aware of their ability to provide commentary. So you've got stuff like Bombshells now,
Yeah.
or well, not running anymore, but still. You got stuff like Bombshells that is incredibly politically outspoken in a way that it had no right to be.
Yeah.
Which is really, really interesting. And you've got things that don't ignore their responsibility, as it were. And so I find that really interesting. Film's getting that way too. A lot of films are becoming much more outspoken about their importance as political work, and particularly the right wing's getting really annoyed with that because they're hating that they don't have things to enjoy now.
As they shouldn't.
Exactly. Fucking Mitch McConnell talking about, oh, I just want to be able to go out to a restaurant. There's no civility left in this country. Well, maybe don't try to kill people.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, like, it's just really interesting how media now is becoming more self-aware, more outspoken, and so it's hard on some levels not to say that the media we're consuming now is the best it could hope to be.
Media now is more aware of the fact that it's culturally representative in a way it wasn't before.
Mm-hmm.
So now, even if it's not doing it more than it has in the past, it just owns it that it's doing it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good example of this. So Daredevil Season 3 is not great. It's not terrible, but it's not great. They had no reason to do a Trump parallel with Kingpin, but they did it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not great, but it's a natural thing to do in this climate.
Mm-hmm.
And you would have done the same thing with any other historical political figure any other time you made a Daredevil story. But because it's now, and because of social media, they own it and they do it right away, and they say that that's what they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
Which is good. It's important to call attention to it. Everything doesn't have to be subtle.
Mm-hmm.
So, especially people that read superhero comics, subtlety's out the window.
Yeah, subtlety doesn't really work in superheroes. It's almost subtlety doesn't work in comics, but you can do subtle in a comic.
I mean, that's the one line Snyder wrote in Batman that's the best thing ever, where he's like, Batman does not do subtle.
Yeah.
As he stares at his giant computer screen.
Right.
He shouldn't do subtle.
No, that is a good moment. So it's just like the way that it's hard to say that there's a decade that had the best kind of media, or that our favorite kind of media is from so many decades, without it kind of going to more current stuff within the last decade or so, because so much of it is becoming more aware of itself and becoming more relevant to you. So, like, it's like when you know something about a movie that conceptually makes it more interesting, but it felt like you had to do homework to learn it.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, that's great if you know that, but I don't have the context to know that. Or not even a movie. Like, Shakespeare is... Shakespeare's plays are, of course, very important historically and everything, but everyone that reads them in high school kind of hates them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
And, like, they do all these things to try to make you enjoy them more, to make you appreciate them, and they probably should. There's definitely some value to reading Shakespeare. But, like, they'll tell you stuff like, oh, you see, all the subterfuge and stuff in Hamlet is actually also a political commentary on the culture of spying in the Elizabethan age. And when you look into that side of things, yeah, it's actually there. That's actually really, really interesting.
Yeah.
But I just did homework to fucking learn that, and so it didn't present itself on its own. So when the piece, when you have to do research to understand the piece loses something. And so now it's hard to say that, like, things that are more current, or we're at least more aware of, aren't necessarily better just because now we don't have to do the research for them.
Well, I mean, we age these things up, right? Like, Sherlock Holmes is a good example of this, where Sherlock Holmes is set in the late 1800s, early 1900s. It doesn't have to be, though, so when we get Sherlock on the BBC, regardless if that show's problems, it does everything Sherlock Holmes does. It has all the same commentary, but it anchors it in modern enough data where if those themes were there already, they now have a contemporary anchor and you don't have to research for them. Taxi Driver Killer makes sense just as much in 1800 as it does in 2000.
Yeah. That's interesting. And then you got stuff like Taxi Driver, which is probably more relevant today than ever before.
Sadly.
Yeah.
It's a really scary movie. Horror movies are another really good example of this, because I think there's been like a really clear shift in the way we do horror movies, where everything from like the 60s, 70s, and 80s, so it's like 60s and 70s horror movies are metaphors for communism all the damn time. That's what zombies are. That's what Invasion of the Body Snatchers is. All of that is just metaphor for communism. Then slashers show up, and slashers are outside force attacking the home. And now we don't do that. Now it's you move into the home, and the home is the thing that's trying to kill you. Horror movies now only make sense in a context where you lived past an economic recession caused by housing. And it's not like they're all that smart, but at the same time, would you really do something like The Conjuring before now?
Oh, like, I mean, the haunted house story isn't anything new, right? But
No.
it's not as relevant.
Well, it's
as it
not.
was before.
It's not anchored the same way it is now, right? Like the trope of the haunted house stories are never been as clear as they are now. Of like new family, they're dysfunctional. They move into a house to solve all their problems. The house becomes the cause of all their problems. Like it's never been this systematic and consistent as it is now.
So do you think we're talking about the, like, best era for media, or are we just talking about the evolution of media based on historical context?
The latter.
Yeah, that's
I don't know
interesting.
Where this pilot at that?
I think it's kind of natural, because I don't think the other one has an answer, and the other one just seems more of an excuse to gush about, oh, this thing's really good, this thing's really good. And we can still do that, of course, but like I think that it quickly becomes this other conversation because it's just apparent that the effects of time on media change it. Yeah. Because you were just talking about this when we reviewed Nosferatu on Geeky Gentleman. You weren't there for it, and you were like, "Did you guys talk about the way in which it's anti-Semitic propaganda?" I'm like, "Wait, what?" Yeah. Because again, I don't have the context for that because I don't consume anti-Semitic propaganda on a daily basis, so I was unaware of the ways in which it parallels and clearly is that. And so, like, that's an interesting example wherein something was brilliant for filmmaking techniques in the time and stuff, in certain ways, but is problematic now because of anti-Semitic propaganda things, but so much of that has faded from public consciousness that it's almost not anti-Semitic propaganda anymore?
Well, because that's the thing about it, is that it, at the time it came out, it's exactly what anti-Semitic propaganda was, but the metaphor for vampires and the metaphor for anti-Semitism have changed so much that you can't really read it that way now. Yeah. Like, it's not anti-Semitic by today's standards because of how we think of anti-Semitism is not expressed with vampires. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that's not why it was created. Yeah. So you have to acknowledge that that's there and have to put an asterisk next to the movie. At the same time, though, if you're going to be racist, Nosferatu is the least efficient way to do it now.
Yeah, and like it's just like it's kind of the opposite effect of the Elizabethan politics in Shakespeare that I just mentioned. There. Yeah, like that one's the thing that made it interesting doesn't matter anymore, and now with Nosferatu, it's the thing that made it fucked up doesn't matter anymore. Or it's not that anti-Semitism isn't a problem, it's that the coding there is so lost to time now, to most people, I think.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of those things. I had to have that explained to me because I had no idea that that's what happened, but then when they had it explained, it makes perfect sense. But it only makes sense if you explain that historical context, because it doesn't exist anymore. Yeah. Vampires have changed in particular so much that it's hard to, like, narrow them down into any one sort of category. Like, they're sex metaphors, they're metaphors for anti-Semitism, they're metaphors for puberty, like, they're everything. It's really bizarre.
Yeah, and it's just because that's kind of what horror has developed into, because I was talking about this during Horror Month at a certain point, where horror didn't used to be its own thing. You know, like, fairy tales just used to be super fucked. Yeah. right? Like there just used to be horror elements in it, and then like Disney comes along. It's obviously not just Disney. It's not any one thing. It's just all these things come along as we start mass producing media that siphon off and kind of put horror into its own little corner, shut away from everything else. So it becomes more refined in that way. So like you couldn't really have a story without a happy ending before, like, but now that horror is just kind of its own thing, yeah, you can.
Yeah.
And it's scary.
Yeah.
And so, like, even when you have happy endings in horror movies, sometimes they're, like, super uncomfortable, like The Babadook, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, yeah, she's over everything, and she's gonna be a better mother to her son now, and all this shit. Yeah, but, like, literally the thing that almost made her kill her son is living in the basement. You can never get rid of it. That's scary.
Yeah.
So it's just this... It's a really different dynamic as things change and evolve and media changes. So like we've refined and created genres now that didn't used to exist. Like
superheroes are a really good example now. Superhero movies exploding is a really bizarre thing that seems to only make sense now.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got a more of a conspiracy theory hypothesis as to why that's happening, and it's tied into memes, partly because I have that whole thing about how comic books are important and they make sense and they're unique art because they capture structurally what trauma feels like. And everyone, all millennials, are clearly traumatized or memes would not be funny. And because comic books are all structural trauma, superhero movies are popular because everyone's traumatized.
Wow.
I think that's what's happening.
Everyone's traumatized.
Everyone has? Why would suicide memes be the most popular thing on the internet if everyone on the planet wasn't traumatized?
What if people are just less averse to, less scared off by suicide now and
No, we're all
understanding?
traumatized.
No?
Yeah, we're all traumatized.
Oh, okay. It can't be a
traumatized.
positive thing. It has to be the most negative thing possible.
We're traumatized.
Okay.
We are culturally traumatized. That's where we're at. 2 out of every 3 memes you see is just depression, and it's funny. Because we're traumatized.
That's terrible.
I know. But it's true.
My God, that's ridiculous. Okay. Anyway. I was going to go for more like a general thing, like rom-coms. Like the Greek sense of tragedy or comedy. Like, yeah, they marry and are happy ever after. That was hilarious for some reason. and so that was just called a comedy. Anything that wasn't a tragedy was a comedy. And yet comedies become something. Rom-coms have become a genre of their own. And it's just because of the development and the way we've, in Western culture at least, the way we've whittled down and kind of distilled these genres.
Well, that's the thing, right? We do a lot of romantic comedies still. We do a lot of dramas now, but we don't do any dramedies anymore. What's the last time you've seen one?
What would an example of one be?
It's the thing, right? What is a dramedy at this point? What's the last one that existed?
Death at a Funeral is just a dark comedy.
Yeah, it's a dark comedy. It's not a dramedy. Shit, right? Like, what is a
Punch Drunk Love?
The Martian's a dramedy.
Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind?
That movie's depressing.
But it's got funny moments.
I guess. Yeah, I guess that's a dramedy.
It's not just that it's got comedic relief. It's got legitimately funny moments.
That's fair. Most Wes Anderson movies, probably.
Yeah.
But they lean heavily on the
Grand Budapest.
comedy. Yeah, Grand Budapest. That's a depressing ass movie too.
Yeah, but it's got absolutely hysterical scenes.
Oh god, yeah, it's hysterical.
Yeah. So I mean, it's not that it's not done, but it's much more the exception.
Well, we are culturally obsessed with making prestige dramas or romantic comedies. Everything has to be a prestige drama for some reason.
Yeah. Now, like, do you think it'd be... And I don't even know, like, if this is on topic or not. It's just an interesting thought. Can you just start, like, mixing genres that have no business being together? Can you make a romantic comedy horror movie?
Warm Bodies.
Yeah?
Yeah, it's a romantic comedy horror movie.
I don't think I've seen that one.
It's about the zombie apocalypse, and the zombie dude falls in love with one of the last remaining human survivors.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah, it's not terrible. It's alright.
Okay. Alright. So, like, and then just other weird shit like that. Like, can you make, I don't know, a mystery, like, mystery horror makes sense, but, like, mystery drama is weirder?
Why is mystery drama weirder? Aren't most mysteries by definition dramas?
Yeah, but I'm thinking more like melodrama, I guess I'd say.
Melodrama. Bad Times at the El Royale.
Okay, so like you're thinking of a lot of these, but then
We genre bend a lot. There was a time when cowboy space opera was the most absurd thing ever, and now it's the most overplayed thing ever.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So the way that we've whittled down genres then, and is kind of an effect of trying to produce so much stuff because we're trying to make it more easily consumable.
Yeah.
I
mean, with streaming services, streaming original content, tracking user data, at this point you just genre bend everything all the time because that's the best way to get something out there. Brighton's a really good example of that's like 3 different genres thrown at the same time because they didn't know what was going to stick.
And none of it was good.
No, none of it was good. Sort of the problem with Solo. Did you watch Solo?
No.
That was sort of the problem with Solo, where clearly there were 3 or 4 movies in that one movie, and all of them were entertaining movies, but none of them were the movie. So...
I thought you loved Solo.
I did. It's really fun.
Okay.
But it's not a good movie.
Oh.
But it's just really fun.
Okay.
Yeah.
Huh. Interesting. Alright. So with the idea that the way that art's evolving in the last decade as more of it's being made and less of it's being reconsumed. Do you think that we're just bound to... This is weird because we got clone projects, right? But don't think of clone projects. Don't think of Olympus Has Fallen and White House Down, right?
Okay.
We're in this cycle of remaking things all the time, right? Are we getting to the point where we're producing so much stuff that we're going to have a 1,000 monkey situation where someone's going to make literally the same movie and not do it intentionally? Literally make the same movie as something else that already exists and not do it intentionally?
I feel like we've been bumping up against that and they just never catch on. The 3rd act of Skyfall and the 3rd act of Hard Target are the same thing.
Okay.
I've been saying that for years. They're the same thing. No one seems to get it, but they are.
I don't think I've seen Hard Target.
It's literally the same thing as Skyfall when the movie ends.
Okay.
It's literally, here's a woman that needs to be protected, so the main character man takes her in his car or his signature vehicle out into the country where an old man that raised him as a child lives in his ancestral home, and they booby-trap everything to lure the bad guys out and then hunt them by blowing shit up and have one big final showdown in a fiery cabin. It's literally the same movie at the end.
Wow.
It's insane.
That's crazy.
And we do this all the time. I swear to you, if we went up to Purvis and Wade and we told them, did you realize you stole the ending to Hard Target? They would not know what I'm talking about. And then we'll show them the ending and they'll realize they stole the ending.
There's a link in the description to a GoFundMe to be able to...
Prove to Purvis and Wade they stole the ending to Skyfall.
And then I guess the question becomes, does it matter?
No.
Because more people saw Skyfall than saw Hard Target?
I mean, it's a Jean-Claude Van Damme movie. No one was going to watch it. So, yeah. Yeah, I don't think it matters. But no, you're right. We're doing this all the time. Oh, God, what was the other example? Batman Earth 1 Volume 2.
And Superman Earth 1 Volume 3. Yes!
It's the same ending!
It is! It's the same twist. That is, and it's, there's so much time, you think someone at DC would have caught that shit.
Nope.
No, not at all.
The scheduling and the breakdowns for Earth 1 have been so bad, it makes perfect sense that ended up happening, though.
Yeah. God, that's the silliest shit, isn't it?
It's the same damn thing.
Christ.
There's too much material, right? There's way too much happening.
Yeah, and it used to be the first university in Western society was founded to study the Bible, the Iliad, and the Odyssey.
Yes.
And that was it. and that's all the media that they consumed was those three things. Not even like they preserved the plays from the Greeks and shit, but they didn't even study that shit. Just the Iliad, the Odyssey, and the Bible. And, like, that was all they consumed. And now we've got, like, you know, you'll meet someone who, like, can quote entire chapters of the Bible and shit.
Sure, yeah.
And that's because that's all they read.
Yeah.
They don't, like, you and I can sit here and talk about, like, between the two of us, can we describe All-Star Superman beat for beat?
I haven't read it in a while, but probably.
Yeah.
Tom King Batman might be a better example. We could probably describe that beat for beat.
Beat for beat, issue for issue, maybe.
Literally issue for issue, I think we could do that.
Yeah. So, like, we could do that, but we consume so much more. We consume all these other things. We fucking, like, how many different things have we watched since you've been here already? Castlevania,
God, yeah.
Sabrina,
One Punch Man,
Troy.
Troy.
Yeah, just all these other things that we've watched just in a short time because we're just Dragon Ball R&R.
Dragon Ball R&R.
Yeah, just all these little quick things that we watch, and yet we're able to keep track of it so much more, but not to the same depth of level as someone who does shit like memorize the Bible and can point out crazy connections in the Iliad and the Odyssey that no one else is able to point out.
Well, but then at the same time, given our knowledge of media and pop culture and comics in particular, go out to anyone that hasn't done any of this and try to teach it to them. Mm-hmm. Could you imagine how crazy it would sound to be like, okay, so you're going to, by the time we're done, know by heart whenever everything in comics history has happened. Like it's instinct.
Uh-huh. Yeah, fun one there.
How are we like this?
Yeah. And then there's, like, things that... I don't even know how much this has to do with anything, but I think about this stuff quite often. Like, of just accidentally time traveling and having to explain shit to people.
Yeah.
In the past or some shit like that. I'm like, you know, like, I imagine meeting, like, Plato. It's like, so explain to me the highest form of art you have. I'm like, okay. So there's this guy who dresses like a bat. And then there's this airplane that's going to crash. And he doesn't have any superpowers, but other people in his world do. And he's got to figure out how to save the airplane.
What's an airplane?
Exactly. We got to, like, explain all that shit. But, like, how would I even be... And this goes back to they don't even have the context for it. Not just because of the elements of the story, but, like, they don't... Batman's a character archetype that's existed for hundreds of years, but he wasn't... That archetype wasn't heavily refined back then. So I couldn't explain even Batman as an archetype to Plato, but I could probably explain it to Johnston McCauley, the guy that created Zorro.
Yeah.
Because he's aware of it. So, like, where along the line do people start to have enough context to understand stuff in the modern age? And, we're more aware of this kind of thing because, I mean, like, that's the side of that I don't think of. How would I talk to a time traveler from the far future, and how would I have to deal with them? Like, I mean, I guess my first question is going to be, like, do you still have Batman?
Is Tom King still writing?
Yeah, is Tom King still around? Like, in Far Enough, of course not, but, like, what if, you know, it's weird to try to think about and talk about that stuff.
This is why Doctor Who should be the greatest thing in the universe, and it's not.
It was for just a minute, though.
Fraction of a second, it really was. Doctor Who should be so much better than it is, because it should be able to do this kind of stuff.
And when it does, it's great.
When it does, yeah. The Van Gogh episode is like one of the best things I've ever seen in my life.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a good episode. It's so sad and so beautiful. And so
cool. Of course, I have the context for the Van Gogh episode.
Yeah.
Some people watching don't. And so it's just like, that's weird. The level of the quantity of things that are all trying to be self-aware, trying to be more, give more depth. But I don't think anything goes as deep as older media does in the modern age. I think there are some things that try, but I don't think anything reaches as deep as something like the Iliad, the Odyssey, or the Bible did.
I mean, I think that's just because they were around so long that we started creating institutions around them, right? Mm-hmm. Like, all of our superheroes we understand in Greek myth terms because Greek myth terms are the conditions under which we constituted them.
Okay.
Same thing with the Bible. Like, if we didn't live in a system where biblical ethics on some level is the structure of how we make everything, then it wouldn't have as much staying power.
Okay.
Like, Paradise Lost is the greatest story of all time, partly because it's the only story we told for 2,000 years.
Mm-hmm. I was talking more not like deep effects, but like that are as deeply layered within the piece itself. You know, like there's like when you deconstruct something and there's a word that's chosen because it references 3 other things that happened in that sentence on that page and 10 other things that have happened so far in the book, right? Or in the story. I don't feel like media gets as deep as that. Like when we have good line, it's more boiled down and it's supposed to be more immediate. It's not supposed to necessarily connect throughout the whole piece anymore.
Well, part of it's because we don't have to, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, the Bible, regardless of what you believe, is a thing that's designed to be studied.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes sense for, like, everything to have multiple layers and to reconnect because it's supposed to be read in small chunks where everything ties back to everything else. It's not designed to be intaked as art, but if you try and intake it as art, it seems like it's really deep and sophisticated and layered.
Mm-hmm.
If we wrote a Batman book that was designed to be like a textbook, and then someone else picked it up as art, you'd have the same problem.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
No, that does. It's just, it's...
And the Iliad and the Odyssey are designed to be history books. They're not designed to be art.
I disagree with that because they're designed to be poetry, too.
I mean, they're designed to be poetry, but they're designed to be historical. They're not designed to be... Homer doesn't set out and make those two things as, I'm going to tell the greatest story ever told. Mm-hmm. He's going to be like, the greatest story ever told happened, here it is.
Okay. Alright, I think that's fair. And I guess the Bible's attempting the same kind of thing.
Right.
So.
It's supposed to be literal as far as the person who... Not only as far as the person who wrote it thinks, but as far as most people that made it important think.
Okay, but then I still feel like the older media... The older pieces that were trying to be art were attempting at least to be much deeper. Viking poetry is a fucking bitch. You think Heidegger's writing is pretentious as fuck?
Fair.
Viking poetry. But more general example that people would be familiar with, I'll stick with Shakespeare and Hamlet. Because, yeah, 18th century, or not 18th, 13th century fucking Elizabethan politics.
I mean, I don't know. I feel like Shakespeare is hard to read because English has changed, not because Shakespeare in Elizabethan English is difficult.
Well, no, but I mean, like, he's tying it to... He's got a piece that's tied to politics, and then there's, like, all these... There's all the duplicitous nature of all the characters, and so you've got, like, the speech, you know, to be or not to be, that is the question, whether it is nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or by opposing and them. Like that.
You're assuming that like that work of art in the vacuum it was created was a high degree of art for that time period, as instead of just the thing that we chose to fixate on. Right? This is historically.
It's hard not to say that it's both.
But it's part of why it's both is because you have historical institutions that say this is the thing you ought to focus on.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's the issue. It's not like women weren't writing poetry and making making novels and shit since the dawn of time. It's that we only focused on these people's writings.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like there were some great exceptions. It's just that we made these the exceptions.
Yeah.
I mean, one of my favorite lines of all time is in Terry Eagleton's literary theory book where he's like, you can very easily imagine a future where someone gets nothing out of Shakespeare. Because Shakespeare only matters insofar as the culture around it decides it matters.
Mm-hmm. I'm just talking more about the deep connections within the piece, the layered connections.
Sure, I'm just saying
don't see
that
as much anymore.
I'm just saying, but I think the issue here is it's not like they were deep by his standards.
Okay, like that everyone was just doing it back then.
Yeah, like there's nothing.
Yeah,
to say
and I agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, like that's the thing that drives me crazy about Shakespeare is we choose to remember him, but like that's just the way everyone wrote. So really, it might be the best of the time, but I think that's a bad argument.
Well, and if you try to make Shakespeare the kind of layering that Shakespeare did now, it's just bad.
Yeah,
not because
it's just too much and it's incomprehensible.
Yeah, and it's not because Shakespeare is somehow better. It's because that's not how you write anymore.
And we've gotten like minimalism is something that I think would shock the fuck out of a lot of historical artists for any medium.
Russian novels, right? Russian novels are a really good example of this, of like 1,000-page overwritten boring slogs because the writers got paid for doing like 10 pages at a time in a magazine.
Mm-hmm.
So they made them long on purpose.
Yeah.
It's incomprehensible nonsense. It's not some great, deep, layered art. It's just the way the culture constructed the art to work. But we can choose to make it deep and layered because it is what it is.
You ever seen Shakespeare Abridged?
No, what?
It's so funny.
How do you abridge Shakespeare? Are you talking... What?
It's a play, and it's not... I actually said it wrong. I said the quick version. It's the complete works of William Shakespeare abridged.
That sounds fun.
It's like an hour-and-a-half stage play, and they go through all of them, and it's 3 dudes.
That sounds amazing.
It's the funniest shit ever. As like the just shitty wig on a guy doing this voice for Juliet and shit like that. So like you get to,
which is probably historically accurate.
Yeah, very. You get to some weird shit when you start to do that. It's kind of hilarious. When you start to just boil it down and go, okay, yeah, this is overwritten, so let's just cut.
Yeah. I'm not saying you can't dissect every line in Shakespeare. I'm just saying you don't have to.
Yeah, you don't have to, and I'm more talking about like we've definitely put less into it. So it's weird because it makes it stand out when something's got those deep connections. Because I love Brian Azzarello's dialogue.
Sure.
Yeah. Batman the Damned, Enchantress shows up, and it's this scene where young Bruce Wayne is listening to his parents talk. And he says, I wish they'd just stop fighting. And then Enchantress shows up and she says, I can grant your wish, but I need you to cry for me. It'll hurt so bad. Or something to that effect. And those lines mean, oh yeah, I can make them stop fighting by killing them.
Yeah.
So I can make them stop fighting, but it's going to cost you tears to do it because I'm going to kill them.
Right.
Like, that's a really deep and layered couple lines, and it's not even in really elegant dialogue. It's meant to be in kind of like a broken English kind of thing. And so it's interesting as hell when you have lines like that come up.
I mean, Tom King's another really good example of this, of just repeat, repeat.
Yeah, but that's very minimalist, though.
Yeah.
Like, he boils it down to the line, whereas Azzarello makes, like, a great line.
That's true.
Yeah. Tom King...
Tom King will give you one really good line 6 times. Mm-hmm. And it'll be great because it's there 6 times.
Yes, exactly. I mean, it's funny when I see people, like, Darkseid has taken off so much because of Mr. Miracle.
Because it's such a good idea.
But at the same time, it's not Tom King, right? It's Morrison.
It's Grant Morrison.
And it's so crazy how that got, like... kept.
Well, Morrison never said it more than once. That was the problem.
Well, no, he said it more than once. Like, everyone's saying it in Rock of Ages, but it's in just those 2 issues.
Right.
And that's the crazy part. Like,
he wasn't breaking panels. You weren't seeing an entire black block that said Darkseid is every 6 pages.
And so it's weird how, like, that side comes up about it. But yeah, now it used to be that, like, the mark of a good text was how layered and how deep it was. And now we do that. I think Sandman's got that. But now it's so much more rare to see that, because for a long time we focused on just form, just story. You know, I feel like metaphor was abandoned for a good long time there, and to the point where people almost forgot about it. Like, I mentioned I really like the Universal Monster movies.
Yeah.
I don't think those movies are aware of the metaphors the monsters stand for half the time.
Oh, God, no.
Yeah.
Why would they be? Well, I mean, part of this is, and shocking troll comment words, postmodernism. Literal is metaphoric now. That's just kind of how it works. Like Community, right? Mm-hmm. Community is a really good example of a thing that's one massive metaphor, but it's so completely aware of it all the damn time, it's almost not a metaphor.
I'm doing a bottle episode!
Exactly! Exactly! It's so completely aware it doesn't matter. Yep. I mean, Tom King's Batman almost literally talks to the page every now and then at this point. Mm-hmm. Like, if Darkseid is not the most fourth wall breaky thing, what is?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that side of it gets really interesting, and just you wind up in this really weird ball of meta-ness, and like, is it really gonna shock anyone anymore if you just find out you like? There's been all that thing like, oh, what if we're just a massive computer simulation or some kind of piece of media in someone else's life? I'm like, would it really shock you anymore that like everything else is so fucking meta? Would that surprise you nowadays?
Yeah, I mean, like, postmodernism at the end of the day is just the idea that we don't believe in grand meta narratives anymore. Mm-hmm. So at the end of the day, if we are all a simulation, who cares? It doesn't matter.
There's actually a really good episode of Capaldi's run of Doctor Who.
Yeah.
Where everyone realizes they're in a giant computer simulation that was built by an alien race in order to learn the best way to invade Earth. Mm. And so, like, everyone's realizing this, and the Doctor realizes that he's a simulation of the Doctor there. Mm. And so he figures out the best way to save the Earth, even though he's in the simulation, is to email the Doctor. The real one.
Oh man, that's amazing.
Yeah, so it's so fucking deep, and just God, if those seasons just didn't suck. But that one's really, really interesting in that way.
Capaldi, as far as I never finished any of his stuff, but every now and then he'd have a scene that I really like, and that's it.
Yeah. Like there's that whole thing between the Zygons and shit, and
that viral clip that took off, that anti-war thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great, but like but it's
that
weird.
It's terrible.
Yeah, it's weird in context. It's like, but they keep killing people. You can't just let them keep doing that until they learn their lesson.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is so not a good episode. It's just a good scene.
It really is. It's like the metaphor is great until you realize what the metaphor is, and it's really weird. Like I was talking about with Castlevania.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure, this is showing the church being like really bigoted and ignorant and stupid, but at the same time, she's legit married to Dracula. They're not wrong.
No, she made a pact with the devil. So.
Like, I mean, they're looking at the wrong evidence, but they're still right. So this is weird. It's like, oh well, if they just didn't do that, then Dracula wouldn't have killed everyone. Maybe, but like, what if Dracula was just a dude on the edge and anything could have made him break? Like, what if she fucking sprained her ankle or some shit, or got run over by an ox cart one day?
He could be Anakin for all you know.
Right? It's weird. It's weird when you lose the metaphor like that. So yes, text is getting more meta now. Again, it's getting more aware of it, but then it's kind of like it's not being meta enough, so we're getting this weird swing swong.
Superheroes, right? Part of the reason superheroes take over is we don't believe in grand meta narratives anymore. You don't need a metaphor. You got a guy who literally wears the American flag going around beating people up. Mm-hmm. Like, that's just where we're at now. Yeah.
And so, like, as we try to introduce them more, we're having trouble learning how to write them properly. And, like, that was the whole thing with Nick Spencer's Captain America, right? Mm-hmm. Is like, yes, I get what you're trying to do, but you're not thinking through the implications of that. You're in this point of, like, oh, no, since I know what I'm doing, since I know the purpose behind what I'm doing, that makes everything I'm doing okay. And the answer is no, it doesn't. Just because you have an idea doesn't mean it's a good idea. Just because you have a plan doesn't mean it's a good plan.
Well, this is probably the problem with writing Captain America consistently now, which is every story you do with Captain America, you almost have to say something about the state of America. Mm-hmm. And it's really hard to do that without just coming out and saying something. And no one wants to just come out and say something, which is, fuck, America's a terrible place. You should not be here. Captain America just needs to come out and say, yeah, America's kind of terrible.
Oh, God.
I shouldn't be wearing the flag. And everyone kind of seems to get it. Rick Remender really seemed to want to say that, and he just couldn't say it. Mm-hmm. And Coates probably wants to say it. He says it everywhere else. Yeah, but he doesn't seem to say it in Captain America.
I wonder if he would have been able to do it like 3 years ago, because Marvel does seem to be kowtowing to the whole Comicsgate crowd a lot more.
Oh yeah, I mean they fired that Star Wars guy for creating the first gay character in Star Wars or something.
Well, they didn't fire him for that. They fired him because he was fighting back against Comicsgate. Yeah, and Comicsgate was mad at him for creating a gay Star Wars character.
And Marvel's also when we had the Mockingbird asking about my feminist agenda thing, which was fantastic. Mm-hmm. But obviously Marvel didn't want to deal with that, so they pulled the cover, didn't they?
No, I think they kept that out. I remember seeing that for quite a while, actually.
I remember the writer talking about how they had so much more of a wide readership as a novel writer and no problems, but the moment they started talking about the niche in comics, they started getting misogynistic death threats.
Yeah, yeah. And that's what's interesting about that is she says Marvel's doors are completely closed to her now.
Yeah.
Even though Marvel, like, it's interesting because they'll be very public face about things, and then they'll do a lot of duplicitous shit behind the scenes. So, like, when she started receiving all that harassment and stuff, Marvel's like, no, we stand with her, and now they'll never hire her again for anything.
Yeah.
It's really duplicitous. I'm still fucking shocked Nick Spencer was hired for anything ever again.
I'm surprised he's still doing work.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess if Scott Lobdell can write,
yeah,
might as well.
I hear good things about his Spider-Man, to be fair. I just don't know if I can trust him ever again.
Nick Spencer?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, Superior Heroes Spider-Man's fantastic.
Oh.
We talked about this the other night, yeah. It's exactly that comic you were pitching.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that's what it was. All right.
Yeah.
Well, it's ridiculous.
He's not a bad writer. He's just full of himself.
My word. All right. Do we have anything else we want to talk about with the way that the periods, or the way that art's building on itself, the evolution, the impact of the era kind of thing?
I have a closing question.
What's that?
If you could go back to any era and experience a media as it was coming out, what would it be?
It's hard not to say Star Wars. I kind of want to go to the premiere of every Star Wars movie.
Last Jedi was so perfect for me, I almost don't care anymore. I saw Last Jedi opening weekend. That's all I'll ever need in my lifetime.
Yeah? Well, you kind of, like, if I remember correctly, you read the spoilers for Last Jedi. Would you like to change that aspect?
Nah.
No?
I'm down.
You'll never get the, like, yes, no, fuck him.
I did, in the theater, because it works in the moment despite knowing the spoiler.
I don't know, like,
I've never had a thing against spoilers. It doesn't matter to me.
Fair enough, I do. I think there's that one moment, and you can only have it the one time, so why ruin it for yourself?
I don't think a twist has ever legitimately blown my mind. Ever.
Hmm.
Name, like, one classic twist, and I'll guarantee you it did not blow my mind. Either I already knew about it, or the twist itself wasn't that good or something. Iron Man 3 is a good example, where I love the twist in Iron Man 3, but, like, it's kind of predictable if you think about it in the movie.
But did you know it going in?
No. But, like, when you watch that movie, I'm like, oh, it makes perfect sense. It's not a twist in the sense of the movie becomes something different. It's a twist in the sense that you know going into the movie as a comic book fan what you wanted to happen, but was very clearly not what that movie was from the opening scene.
Okay. Fair enough. I don't know, like, I like that. I guess I'm just more gullible than you. I don't know. I like twists.
I don't know if it's that. I just don't think I've ever seen a twist that's legitimately like the twist has made the movie for me.
Okay. I don't know if the twist has made the movie. It was just like you can only get it the one time is my thing.
Yeah.
And so if you lose it that one time, it's not that it ruins it or makes it better if you had it. It's just that you'll only get it the once.
Sometimes you spare yourself pain, though.
Yeah?
You spare yourself the pain of knowing Batman vs. Superman if you read the spoilers and then go in prepared for it.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe. Alright.
So Star Wars is your answer, then?
It's hard not to say, like... Well, okay. Kind of, but if I can't experience the Darth Vader thing for the first time... you know?
That's fair.
So, what else?
Yeah, you wouldn't want your future Star Wars knowledge going into those moments either.
Yeah. So what else? What's something... I mean, it'd be kind of interesting to be able to look at the audience for some things. Like Psycho.
Yeah, because they close the theater doors after the first 30 minutes.
Yeah.
It's a different movie after the first 30 minutes.
Uh-huh. So that would be different. But that's just more a curiosity. That's not like a long-term desire. What do you got?
Weirdly enough, because it's not my personality and I don't care about the franchise, first episode of Star Trek.
Really?
Yeah, not for any sort of, like, I care about Star Trek or history of sci-fi reason, but because historically that first episode of Star Trek is such a weird culture shock thing in the history of TV dramas that I just want to go back and see that. Like, imagine watching Leave It to Beaver, and then the next thing on is Star Trek.
Yeah.
I want to see that. That seems interesting.
I got you there. And, like, so But you're kind of in the same boat that I am, where it's like more of a morbid curiosity to the reaction thing, as opposed to just the piece itself.
Yeah. I mean, I don't give a shit about what episode of Star Trek it is or what. I just want to go back in time to be like, okay, here's all of these people who are about to have their minds blown. Mm-hmm. What is that like?
Yeah.
Allegedly minds blown. I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know. That's a good one.
First episode of Twilight Zone, too.
Mm-hmm.
The first episode of Twilight Zone is the one where he wakes up and the entire town's empty, I think.
I think you might be right. It's been a minute. I don't know. Some of that stuff, sure, but, like, part of me wants to say stuff that you can't experience anymore. Like, you're picking all this stuff that you can still watch, at least after the fact. I'm kind of curious to things that you can never... That only happen the one time and only happen live and...
Original cut of Metropolis.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
That could be interesting, or, I don't know, go way back and see, like, plays that we don't even have but we know existed.
Seeing a Shakespeare performance with Shakespeare.
Yeah.
That'd be interesting.
Like, what if he sucked as an actor?
You know what? I'll change mine to the original performance of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf.
Oh, yeah?
I love that play.
Did that surprise get you at all?
Yes.
See?
That
one
got me. That one got me partly because of the experience of reading it in class.
Okay.
But, like, yeah, Virginia Woolf.
Okay.
I love that play.
It's super depressing.
It is so depressing. God, that book, that play. Their son was dead the whole time. What the hell?
Spoilers.
It's like 50 years old. Not even a spoiler anymore.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, there's documentation of, like, that, you know, because philosophers would discuss, well, like in this play, and name the example and everything. But, like, the cited play exists, the example from it exists, but the play doesn't anymore. The script didn't survive. And so it's just like, well, what was that? That would be interesting. You'd need, like, the, like, Hitchhiker's Guide fishing year kind of thing, but still.
And depending on what the example is, you'd have to have a lot of other things sorted out to make it work. Like, for example, Poetics has Aristotle's explanation of tragedy, and then he wrote a separate book called The Comedy to explain comedy, but comedy was lost. Mm-hmm. So you'd have to go back in time and find the comedy, but you'd also have to learn ancient Greek.
Mm-hmm. I don't know, I feel like if you get the Rosetta Stone kind of moment.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
That's something that still fucks with my head. That, like, people didn't know how to read hieroglyphs for, like, 1,700 years.
They're confusing. It's Pictionary.
I know, but, like...
Who in the planet do you know that's good at Pictionary?
The Egyptians?
Except them.
Yeah. I don't know, it's just... That's a historical little thing that, like... It's all just one fucking rock. They've never found another one. Just one fucking rock saved an entire nation's history. That's crazy.
It's really fascinating.
All right. I think we're good then.
Yep, I think we're all right.
All right, everyone, thank you very much for watching. Until next time, I'm the Philosopher.
I'm the Exile.
And we are your Geeky Gentlemen. And we will be discussing things.